April 29, 1945. Dawn was breaking over Bavaria. The soldiers of the U.S. 45th Infantry Division were advancing toward Munich. They had orders to capture a labor camp called Dachau. Intelligence said it was a detention facility, maybe some political prisoners, maybe some enemy combatants. They had no idea they were about to witness the face of absolute evil. The convoy rolled through the Bavarian countryside. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Then they smelled it. A sickly, sweet smell of death carried on the wind. The soldiers looked at each other. Something was very wrong. They reached the outskirts of the camp. There was a railroad siding. A train was parked there. 39 boxcars stretching into the distance. The doors were sealed shut. Private First Class John DeGros approached the first car. He pulled open the sliding door. What he saw made him stumble backward. Bodies, piled on top of each other like cordwood, thousands of them. Men, women, some barely looked like teenagers. Their skin was stretched tight over their bones. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing. They had died of starvation, thirst, typhus. They had been locked in those cars for days, maybe weeks. Some of the survivors later said the Germans just left the train there and walked away, left them to die in the dark. The soldiers moved down the line, opening car after car. Every single one was the same, a tomb on wheels. 2,300 human beings reduced to skeletons. One soldier, a farm kid from Texas, turned to his sergeant and said, "Sarge, what the hell did we just find?" The sergeant couldn't answer. He was staring at a body near his feet. A young woman, maybe 20 years old. She was clutching a piece of bread in her hand. She had died reaching for it. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, the battalion commander, arrived at the scene. He was a tough officer. He had fought across Europe. He had seen combat. He had seen death. But this was different. He walked along the train. He saw his men, hardened combat veterans, sitting on the ground with their heads in their hands. Some were crying. Some were vomiting. Some just stood there, frozen, their minds trying to process what their eyes were seeing. Sparks knew he had to keep them moving. He shouted, "On your feet! We have a camp to secure! Move out!" But the damage was done. Something inside these men had broken. The rage was building, a cold, quiet, lethal rage. They marched toward the main gate of Dachau. The camp was massive. Barbed wire fences, guard towers, electrified perimeter. And there, standing at the gate, were the Nazi soldiers. Not just SS, regular Wehrmacht, camp guards, officers, about 560 of them in total. They knew the war was over. They knew the Americans were coming. So they did what soldiers do when they lose. They tried to surrender. The ranking officer, a young lieutenant named Heinrich Wicker, walked out under a white flag. He was wearing his dress uniform. His boots were polished. His medals were pinned to his chest. He approached the American line. He stood at attention. He saluted. He said in broken English, "I surrender this camp to the United States Army. I request quarter under the Geneva Convention." An American captain stared at him. This clean, well-fed Nazi officer, standing there like he was handing over a barracks. The captain looked past him. He could see the camp. He could see the smoke from the crematorium. He could smell the bodies from the train. The captain walked up to Wicker, face to face, and he punched him in the mouth. Wicker fell to the ground, his white flag in the mud. The captain stood over him and said, "Geneva Convention? You want to talk about the Geneva Convention? You murdered thousands of people, and now you want protection? The Americans pushed through the gate. Chaos erupted. The prisoners inside the camp saw the American uniforms. 30,000 living skeletons rushed the fence. They were screaming, "Americans! Americans! We are saved!" They were crying. They were laughing. They were trying to hug the soldiers through the barbed wire. But while the prisoners celebrated, the American soldiers were hunting. A group of Nazi guards, about 40 of them, were found near the administration building. They had their hands up. They were shouting, "Kamerad, Kamerad, we surrender." They thought surrendering would save them. They were wrong. A young lieutenant, possibly Lieutenant William Walsh, looked at these men. He had just walked through a barracks. He had seen people who weighed 70 pounds. He had seen a room where the Nazis kept gold teeth pulled from corpses. He looked at his men. He saw the same rage in their eyes. He made a decision. "Against the wall," he ordered. The Germans hesitated. "Now!" The guards lined up against the concrete wall. They were confused. They were starting to panic. "Bitte, bitte, please," one shouted. A private set up a Browning automatic rifle. Another soldier chambered a round in his M1 Garand. The lieutenant raised his hand. The German screamed. The lieutenant dropped his hand. Sound of sustained gunfire. The shooting lasted maybe 15 seconds. When it stopped, the wall was pockmarked with bullet holes. The ground was covered with bodies. Some of the guards were still moving. The soldiers walked forward and fired single shots. Finishing them, Lieutenant Colonel Sparks heard the gunfire. He came running from the main gate. He saw his men standing over the bodies. He saw the rage on their faces. He pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots into the air. Sound of pistol shots. "Cease fire. Cease fire immediately. That is an order." The men turned to look at him. One soldier said, "Colonel, you didn't see what's inside those buildings." Sparks had seen it. He'd walked through the barracks. He'd seen the ovens. But he was an officer. He had a duty. "I don't care what you saw," Sparks said. "We are the United States Army. We follow the rules of war. Do you understand me?" The men were silent. One private said quietly, "Yes, sir." But the killing didn't stop. It happened all over the camp. At Tower B, 6 Nazi guards climbed down from the guard post with their hands raised. The American soldiers waiting below didn't let them reach the ground. They shot them off the ladder. Sound of rifle fire. The bodies fell into the drainage canal below. The Americans walked to the edge and kept firing into the water, making sure. At the SS barracks, a group of guards tried to hide in the basement. The prisoners found them first. The prisoners were too weak to fight, but they had numbers, and they had rage that had been building for years. They dragged the guards out into the courtyard. They beat them with shovels, with clubs, with their bare hands. An American sergeant watched from a distance. A corporal asked, "Should we stop them, Sarge?" The sergeant lit a cigarette. "Stop them? Hell no. They earned this." The prisoners tore the guards apart. It was brutal. It was savage. It was justice delivered by the victims. In another part of the camp, the prisoners identified a capo, a German trustee prisoner who had beaten and tortured other inmates for extra rations. The prisoners grabbed him. They dragged him to the latrine pit. They held his head under the filth until he stopped moving. American soldiers stood nearby. They turned their backs. They saw nothing. For 2 hours, Dachau was lawless. The Geneva Convention didn't exist. There was only retribution. Eventually, Sparks regained control. He ordered his men to secure the remaining guards in a locked building. He posted sentries to protect them from both the prisoners and his own soldiers. But the secret couldn't stay buried. A Signal Corps photographer had been there. He had taken pictures. Photos of American soldiers standing over executed German guards. Photos of the bodies against the wall. Photos of the canal full of corpses. Within days, the photos reached headquarters. General Dwight Eisenhower saw them. He was furious. He ordered an investigation. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker was assigned to lead it. Whitaker interviewed over 50 soldiers. He examined the scene. He collected the photographs. He wrote his report. Investigation into the killing of German prisoners of war at Dachau concentration camp. The report was thorough. It was damning. It concluded that American soldiers had executed at least 50 to 80 German guards in violation of the Geneva Convention. It recommended court-martial proceedings against the officers involved, including Lieutenant Colonel Sparks. The report went up the chain of command. It landed on the desk of General George S. Patton. Patton was the commanding general of the Third Army. He was a hard man. He had once slapped a soldier for having battle fatigue. He believed in discipline. He believed in the rules, but he also believed in his men. Patton read the report. He looked at the photos of the executed guards. Then he looked at the photos of the death train. He looked at the photos of the ovens. He looked at the photos of the 30,000 skeletons. Patton called in Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker. He held up the report. "You want me to court-martial the men who liberated that camp?" Whitaker said, "Sir, they executed prisoners. That's a war crime." Patton threw the report on his desk. "A war crime? You know what a war crime is, Colonel? It's what those Nazi bastards did to those people." My boys walked into hell. They saw things that no human being should ever see. And when they snapped, when they killed the monsters responsible, you want me to punish them? Patton leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you something, Colonel. Those SS guards got off easy. A bullet is a hell of a lot more merciful than what they did to those prisoners. My men should get medals, not court-martials." Whitaker tried to protest. "Sir, the rules of war." Patton cut him off. "The rules of war don't apply to animals." And that's what those guards were. Animals. Patton made his decision. He did not sign the court-martial orders. He took Whitaker's report and he buried it. Some say he burned it. Some say he locked it in a safe and classified it top secret. Either way, the investigation was over. No charges were filed. No trials were held. Eisenhower was briefed on Patton's decision. He could have overruled it. He could have demanded justice. But Eisenhower had seen the photos too. He had walked through Dachau himself a few days after liberation. He understood. Eisenhower gave the order, "Let it go." The soldiers who participated in the killings went home. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks went on to have a distinguished career. He never spoke publicly about what happened at the wall. Lieutenant Walsh, if he was indeed the officer who gave the order, returned to civilian life. He never gave an interview. He took his secret to the grave. The soldiers who pulled the triggers tried to forget. Some succeeded, most didn't. For decades, the Dachau reprisals were a whispered secret. Veterans didn't talk about it. The Army didn't acknowledge it. But in the 1980s, historians started digging. Documents were declassified. Soldiers began to speak. The truth came out. Today, the Dachau reprisals remain one of the most controversial moments in American military history. Critics say the soldiers became the very thing they were fighting against. Defenders say the soldiers were human beings pushed beyond their limits. The legal answer is clear. Executing prisoners of war is a war crime. No matter what those prisoners did, no matter what you saw, the moral answer? That's harder. If you had walked past that death train, if you had seen those ovens still warm with human ash, if you had looked into the eyes of a 1-2-year-old child who weighed 50 pounds, could you have kept your finger off the trigger? One veteran said years later, "I know what we did was wrong, I know it was murder, but I'd do it again." Those guards weren't soldiers. They were demons in uniforms, and somebody had to send them to hell. Another soldier said, "I didn't feel like a hero that day. I felt like an executioner. But when I think about those bodies on that train, I don't feel guilty either." The prisoners of Dachau had a different perspective. They saw the Americans as angels of vengeance. They saw justice, not murder. One survivor said, "The Americans did in 2 hours what we dreamed of doing for 5 years. They made our torturers pay." Today, there is a memorial at Dachau. It honors the 41,500 people who were murdered there. It tells the story of the liberation, but it doesn't tell the story of the wall. It doesn't tell the story of the bodies in the canal. That part of history lives in the shadows. The Nazi guards who died that day have no memorial. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves. Their names were erased. History has judged them. And history has judged the American soldiers who killed them. The question is, how do you judge them? This is the impossible question of war. When you see evil, when you see true, absolute evil, do you follow the rules or do you follow your heart? The soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division made their choice, and General Patton made sure they never paid for it. Was it justice? Was it murder? Was it both? I'll let you decide. Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see the story of how Hitler's personal bodyguard met their end, click the video on the screen. Thanks for watching.